Even though South Park has been on the air for nearly 30 years, they've only released one single theatrically released movie, the hilarious 1999 film Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. For years, fans have dreamed of South Park returning to the big screen, despite little to no interest from series creators Matt and Trey. And though the film itself was never followed up in theaters, the story of South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut has actually been followed up in episodes of South Park relatively directly on multiple occasions. So today, let's dive into the weird sequel episodes to South Park's 1999 film and break down exactly how each of them followed up the iconic movie. But first, I want to talk to you about today's video sponsor, MyHeritage. MyHeritage is an incredibly cool service, one that helps countless people discover new aspects of their own family history. Their website can help you build out and discover your own family tree. As you can see here, my dad's side of the family is pretty filled up while my mom's has some gaps. But I know my grandmother actually has a lot of this information, so I can actually go in later and really flesh out the rest of this history here. But I think the coolest aspect of MyHeritage is its ability to search through over 20 billion historical documents, which you can then access to discover records of your family. My grandfather was a reconstructive plastic surgeon who died when I was about 10. There's this fascinating mention in the Milwaukee Sentinel in 1956 talking about saving the lives of burned children. Then, on the flip side, a funnier one from a Florida paper where he talks about the dangers of tanning too much and how he cringes when he sees people who have baked in the sun too long. Honestly, these were simply so cool to see, a really unique learning experience. MyHeritage also has this new enhanced photo option, so you can take old blurry photos of your family and increase the resolution, making them look crisp. Look at Grandma and Grandpa, they look so good. If you're interested, use the link below to get a 14-day free trial. Check out MyHeritage today. So I thought of the idea to cover these episodes while making my recent video about Bigger, Longer, and Uncut itself, which you should totally watch if you haven't yet. But there are 4 episodes that pretty directly reference the events of South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut in their premise. In Season 4, there's the 2-part Do the Handicapped Go to Hell episodes. In Season 5, Terrance and Phillip Behind the Blow. And in Season 21, Super Hard PC-ness. And the cool thing about this trio of follow-ups is that each of them acts as a sort of sequel to different aspects of the feature film. Do the Handicapped Go to Hell is a follow-up on Satan and Saddam Hussein's relationship, a direct sequel to the end of the film where Satan finally breaks things off with Saddam and, of course, kills him. Terrance and Phillip Behind the Blow, as the title suggests, follows Terrance and Phillip's journey after the events of the film, and Super Hard PC-ness follows up the entire War on Canada plotline from the film, directly referencing Sheila's crusade against Terrance and Phillip, with Kyle sadly following in his mother's footsteps. The first pair of episodes from Season 4 actually released barely over a year after the South Park movie itself, a relatively immediate sequel. And while the primary plot of the episode involves the kids' panicked fears that they'll go to hell thanks to Father Maxie's sermons, the rest of the episode takes place in hell, starring Satan himself. In the movie, Satan's entire arc was about escaping his abusive relationship with Saddam Hussein, with some encouragement from Kenny. It's in many ways a classic abusive relationship. Saddam is effectively using Satan for power and sex, while ignoring Satan's actual wants or needs, belittling him to weasel his way into the power position of their relationship. At the end of the film, Satan kills Saddam, as I mentioned before.
He spent so much time convincing me I was weak and stupid that I believed it myself.
But of course, this was not the end of their story. When these episodes begin, Satan is in a loving new relationship with a guy named Chris, but then Saddam ends up right back on his doorstep.
No, it can't be. You're dead. I killed you.
Yeah, you killed me, so? Where was I gonna go, Detroit?
And the entire idea of a follow-up was simply just because of Matt and Trey's fondness for these two characters.
And it was basically just because we like the characters so much of Saddam and Satan that we sort of wanted to bring them back. And we're like, well, yeah, but Saddam died at the end of the movie, and it's like, well, yeah, but where's he gonna go, Detroit?
So obviously, this entire story is just overtly referencing the events of Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. It doesn't really work without the context of their abusive relationship.
I was too busy trying to take over the world to give you what you needed. But I've changed, Satan.
Oh, I haven't heard that before.
Saddam's big song in the musical was literally called I Can Change, and the big turn when Satan finally decided to get rid of him was when he saw Saddam lying with those same exact words.
Hi, buddy. I know I was mean before, but don't worry, I can change.
Oh,
And I really love the way this story follows up and expands Satan's character journey. While he does have one of my favorite subplots in the South Park movie, as well as the best song, it's definitely a smaller story in the runtime department. Getting over Saddam and even giving up his dream to be on Earth at the end is a very satisfying moment, but these episodes honestly feel like they dive into Satan as a character much further. Basically, after this horrible relationship with Saddam, Satan starts dating the polar opposite type of person, Chris.
But I can be a pretty rough tumbler myself. Oops! Butternuts!
Before Saddam showed back up, Satan didn't really need to reconcile with why he made this decision. He wasn't forced to in any way. Chris treats him great, unlike Saddam, but with Saddam back in the picture, Satan is confronted by the fact that he is significantly more attracted to Saddam, and that Chris just doesn't provide him with the excitement and firm hand he wants from his partner.
Of course, there's a part of me that will always love him, but I also know how abusive he was. I'm much happier with you.
Chris basically tries to nice guy his way into security with Satan by being friendly with Saddam, inviting him over, and in his own way, trying to dictate the terms of their friendship with each other.
Oh, hello. You must be Saddam Hussein. Satan told me all about how you guys almost took over the world once.
This is obviously referencing their history and the events of the film, but Chris's insecurities start to really shine through when he attempts to be more forceful in bed to try and turn on Satan, to incredibly cringe results.
You like that, don't you, bitch? I'm a bad boy.
And this then leads to Satan accidentally saying, "I love you, Saddam," instead of Chris, and then meeting Saddam at his hotel room. I think this is such a smart way to follow up Satan's story. It makes tons of sense that Satan would pivot too far in the other direction after his abusive relationship with Saddam, out of fear that he'll find himself in a similar situation. But in doing so, he finds himself with someone who is really nice to him, but is also just not even remotely his type. After Satan sleeps with Saddam, Chris confronts him in the most passive way possible, seemingly acting totally cool with it, which just turns off Satan even more.
Could you not be such a pussy about it? Give me some boundaries. Be jealous.
The rest of the episode is basically spent with Chris and Saddam pettily fighting over Satan, killing each other over and over. One of the other sort of pseudo-connections back to the film that I love is that in that one, Satan would always get advice from Kenny, and in this one, he continues that tradition by seeking it elsewhere, first from this little demon dude, and then later from John Benet Ramsey, who, like Kenny, gives him the advice he ends up needing.
Well, there's one person who I always used to ask when I needed advice.
Who?
God.
In many ways, the end of this episode is a literal deus ex machina, but when Satan does decide to go back and ask God for advice, God helps Satan find himself.
Jesus, what the hell happened to you?
Huh?
You got kicked out of here for being a headstrong rebel, and now you're a whiny little bitch.
I think this is a really great resolution. Satan has to get back to his roots. He realizes that because of that abusive relationship, he had strayed so far from who he was. He finally finds the courage to break things off with both Saddam and Chris and live life for himself for a little bit.
Saddam, you're an asshole, and you'll never be the friend that I want. And Chris, well, you're a pussy, and you'll never be the lover I want.
And to ensure that he never has to deal with Saddam's obsessive ass again, he convinces God to let him into heaven. Great ending. That plot point would actually be followed up later in Ladder to Heaven, when it's revealed that Saddam is building weapons of mass destruction in heaven. So hilariously, this follow-up to the movie got its own follow-up later. Overall, this is for sure the most sequel any of these episodes feel, just an indisputably direct follow-up to the events of the film, continuing Satan's character arc naturally. Then, one season later, we get a bit of a follow-up to Terrance and Phillip in Terrance and Phillip Behind the Blow. This episode is mostly about the boys trying to get Terrance and Phillip back together after they've split up, and this includes an early but brief direct reference to the events of the film.
You understand, we saved Terrance and Phillip's lives once.
Obviously in the film, Terrance and Phillip were prisoners during the American-Canadian War, and were intended to be executed at the USO show. The boys rescued them, though Kyle's mom did eventually murder them, leading to Satan's ascension to Earth, but then Kenny's wish resurrected them, so technically they did save their lives. Twice, kind of. But what does eventually get Terrance and Phillip to put aside their differences is a TV special about their entire careers, looking all the way back to when they first met at school. And a major part of their story in this special are specifically the events of the film. They frame Asses of Fire as this last-ditch effort to revitalize their career.
And though the film also started the Canadian-American War of 1999, in which 8 million people lost their lives, the film was considered a great success.
And in addition to this, we get the first reference to what Terrance and Phillip did immediately after the end of the film.
After almost being executed by by the American government, Terrance and Phillip were eventually returned to Canada, where they were touted as heroes.
While this story is overall a bit less of a direct sequel to the film as the Satan/Saddam story, it's definitely intrinsically tied to it. Terrance and Phillip saw their biggest success with Asses of Fire, which then directly led to the most traumatic events of their lives. I think it's a pretty smart and natural follow-up to reveal that they struggled to continue their careers together immediately after the war. And it's remembering what they went through together in the film that brings them back together.
We sure did go through a lot together. They're back! All right!
Alright, before we get to the last sequel episode, there are a few things that some people sort of consider to be South Park quote-unquote movies. Those aren't what this video is about, but I know people will bring them up if I don't address them, so let's go over them quickly. 2007's Imagination Land trilogy, for one, was floated as a possible theatrical film idea, but in a 2008 AV Club interview, Matt and Trey claimed that the idea didn't feel big enough and that the inclusion of so many existing characters made it feel derivative. So they opted to do a trilogy. They did release a DVD with the episodes cut together in one big movie-like package. The DVD markets it as a movie, but I don't think it's a movie. Additionally, after South Park's latest contract with Paramount, it was initially claimed that they would be producing 14 South Park movies for Paramount Plus, which obviously have really just come to fruition in the form of the South Park specials. The decision to call them movies in the press release was not Matt and Trey's, according to Parker in a 2021 Hollywood Reporter interview. With Viacom, we realized we could make them as long or as short as we needed, and they then went and called them movies. They are the ones who said we are giving them 14 movies in 7 years. All I can say is, for me, personally, I am 52 years old. I have made 3 movies in my life, so you do the math. Okay, now let's move on to the final direct sequel to Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, which actually wouldn't be released until 18 years after the film, the episode Super Hard PC-ness. It definitely feels like this whole overt reference to the events of the movie stemmed mostly from commentary. Throughout their career, Matt and Trey have dealt with censorship pretty directly, to the point where that's sort of what the entire South Park movie became about. The primary storyline is that because the kids saw a naughty movie, the mothers decide that that naughty movie should not exist at all, escalating the situation all the way to the aforementioned American-Canadian War of 1999, basically taking censorship so far that it leads to overt violence. Matt and Trey definitely saw some similarities with the way those mother think about the children type groups tried to censor language, and the way more modern overt PC society also tries to censor language.
And then we had the whole other story with Kyle where we're basically like, isn't it funny that in 1999 we made this movie about people saying the wrong things and getting it blown out of proportion and starting a war. And it's like, nowadays you can say the wrong things and get blown out of proportion and start a war.
And though it is sort of a bummer to see Kyle follow in his mother's footsteps in this episode, it does make a lot of sense on a commentary level. Basically, because of how rude and mean people have been to Kyle in general, often comparing him to his mother, Kyle started to feel like that behavior must be stemming from the TV that they're watching, namely the new Terrance and Phillip Netflix series, and it changed how Kyle saw Terrance and Phillip.
For the first time, I feel kind of bad for the person being farted on.
And though the motivations might seem a bit different, where Sheila was worried about naughty language and Kyle is actually worried about the way people treat one another, they still really did have super similar trajectories here. They were both worried about how this media these kids were consuming was changing their behavior. Kyle reflects on the years of Terrance and Phillip content he's laughed at, including clips we first saw in Behind the Blow, really tying all of this stuff together, but he decides that it just isn't for him anymore. They even have this dramatic scene where Kyle turns on Terrance and Phillip. He takes off his Terrance and Phillip shirt, which is very reminiscent of the one we saw him wear in the movie. And Kyle begins his own crusade against Terrance and Phillip, sadly becoming more and more like his mother. One of the best things about this episode is that Sheila isn't really even in it. It's not like she's influencing Kyle to behave that way directly. It's all just happening on its own.
There's a culture at this school that embraces meanness. And I believe now it comes from a Canadian TV show.
But even when he tries to bring this up to Vice Principal Strong Woman, she kind of just echoes the messages of the South Park movie.
I mean, it's a slippery slope when we start pointing the finger for our own shortcomings.
And this is where all the clear connections to Bigger, Longer, and Uncut come in. Just like Sheila in the movie, Kyle goes on the news as the leader of MAC, formerly Mothers Against Canada, now Millennials Against Canada, and argues that Terrance and Phillip should be removed from the airwaves.
All I'm saying is that there's a culture that originates from Canada, which is at least partly to blame for the state of our country now.
Kyle even has to debate the Canadian Minister of Streaming, who was formerly the Minister of Movies, who Sheila also debated on television, and it all comes down to the exact same thing: censorship.
Ah, so you want to censor it?
We don't want to censor it, we just want to Get rid of it!
They even run a lot of the same talking points. The minister calls Kyle racist for his rhetoric, just like he did Sheila, and they ended on the exact same joke, where Sheila and Kyle both won't stop interrupting the minister.
Please, can I finish? All right, I'm finished.
And just like in the movie, this leads to violence and intimidation. Kyle and Mac hold up and take the entire production of Terrance and Phillip's show hostage until their demands are met.
Didn't think I'd live long enough to see this all happen again.
This obviously feels just like the scene where Sheila takes Terrance and Phillip and arrests them on the set of Conan O'Brien. I do think there is a clear difference in mindset from both Kyle and Sheila, though. In Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, Sheila was really bloodthirsty. She literally wanted to go to war with Canada over the issue. She became Clinton's Secretary of Offense. Kyle is spouting a lot of his feelings very intensely, but it doesn't seem like he fully grasps the reality of what he's suggesting as he rants and raves about the media coming out of Canada.
And everything they do and everything they have done needs to be erased from the earth!
He clearly means this and believes eliminating the Canadian media will make the world a better place until his words get through to President Garrison, who literally nukes Toronto. A huge escalation of the events from the Canadian-American War. And as it happens, Kyle is absolutely horrified by what he has wrought, as he should be. This whole sequence is insane. And I think, probably fittingly, that is the final sequel episode to Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. I think it makes sense that early on in the run of South Park they would follow up some of those events much more closely, but I think the season 21 follow-up is maybe the most surprising, so many years after the film released. But I love how all three of these utilize different aspects of Bigger, Longer, and Uncut and follow them up in entirely different ways. It definitely shows the range and variety that South Park has delivered over its run, and who knows, maybe we'll get another follow-up someday. Personally, I just want them to do another movie musical. And that's all I've got for you. And thank you again to MyHeritage for sponsoring this video. Sign up for a 14-day free trial and enjoy all the amazing features MyHeritage has to offer. Okay, peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny Two Cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny Two Cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.